congratulations, the order of the bottom of the Charles Lord. Oh, yeah, that.
We are gathered to engage in a discourse on the teaching of the Buddha. So, including this activity, whether any action, whether it becomes a good or positive or negative, is dependent on our motivation. So, though we may be engaged in religious or spiritual teaching, if your mind is motivated or tinged with the motivation by the motivation of worldly concerns, and particularly here, since we are going through a text which belongs to the Bodhisattva path, therefore the motivation, if you have the motivation only for yourself alone, for the benefit of yourself alone, it's not the right motivation. And on the part of the teacher, if the teacher seeks some kind of a fame or gain, then it is like doing some business. So although we may be engaged in the Dharma teaching, it becomes some kind of a worldly practice if you have that kind of motivation. Therefore, we need to have the correct, perfect motivation, which is, as you pray in Chinese, may all the three poisons be eliminated. Of course, these negative emotions, the three poisons, cannot go away through prayer. It may be the case that it might work in the case of those who believe in Creator God, but for Buddhists, we cannot do away with or get rid of the three poisons through the blessing of the Buddha alone. So how do we go about with eliminating them is, since all the negative emotions are rooted in ignorance, which is a distorted misconception, and therefore we need to develop a wisdom which realizes the reality as it is. Therefore we pray, may the wisdom fire or the light of wisdom be ablaze. And therefore, as human beings having this marvelous brain, we can actually see things from a wider perspective. We can see with the temporary as well as the lasting goal. And therefore, with the help of this marvelous intelligence, this powerful intelligence, we should be able to differentiate what is right and wrong, and what is the final nature of things, with our wisdom, intelligence, through which we should eliminate the three poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. So with regard to these two lines, it is something that is shared principle to both the Pali and Sanskrit tradition. And then you also pray that may you be free from obstacles, and then may you enter into the Bodhisattva path, the Bodhisattva practices. And so by developing the wisdom light with the help of Bodhichitta, this altruistic aspiration for enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, therefore combining both the wisdom and the method, we serve the purpose of practicing and following the teaching of the Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, that you should have the motivation to benefit yourself as well as all other sentient beings, to fulfill the highest goal of enlightenment. As Rinpoche has said, may the Buddha Dharma spread where it has not spread in the past, where it has spread but declined, may it be revived. And may I be moved by compassion to do this. So, of course, it's not enough just to say, oh, this is said, such and such thing is said in the text and so forth, but when we go about with the teaching, with teaching others, Rinpoche says that those who wish to discipline others' minds should have gained some control over one's own mind first. And it is not enough just to follow the practice partially, calling that this is what is known as a realization, but one should have a comprehensive, broad and understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, the entire teaching of the Buddha. And so just as the prayer says, may I be moved may I work to revive the teaching where it has spread but declined, and may I spread the teaching where it has not yet spread, out of compassion. And so, of course, we do prayers on a daily basis. Sometimes we may spend an hour or so in our prayer and practice. And so mainly what I do in terms of my practice is those of the true principles of Bodhichitta, this altruistic aspiration for enlightenment and the wisdom realizing emptiness. And so these two are the main practices that I do, although I do other practices such as deity yoga practice and so forth. So regarding myself, I am a human being also full of the negative emotions, and who is overcome by the negative emotions as well. So you too, we are all same in being humans. So we are all same mentally, emotionally, and physically. So from my own experience, what I have found to be beneficial and in terms of making transformation within myself, because we have the same kind of brain, and particularly you, the Chinese, are followers of Buddhism traditionally. So let's say the blessing for the tea and the bread first. So I'll be the chant leader here. The qualities of the Buddha are inconceivable, the qualities of the Dharma are inconceivable, and the Sangha are inconceivable. And I make this offering, bread and tea, to the three inconceivables ones. This was just saying that his voice is, I don't know, deeper than the chant master. Señor. So just keep listening while I go through the teaching. So by combining the method and the wisdom, so here method means the extensive aspect of the path, which is related to the relative aspect of the things, such as those of giving, morality, patience, enthusiastic effort. And then Bodhichitta, which is rooted in compassion, also falls under this category. And then wisdom, as I said earlier, mainly it refers to that of the wisdom realizing the final nature of things, although we also have the wisdom realizing relative nature of things as well, relative subjects, such as the five sciences and so forth. But now, in order to counter one's negative, the ignorance within one's own mind, then and having gained the experience, then you can share your experience with others. And so, as I said before, so we need to do the practices in order to tame our mind stream. And therefore, Master Nagarjuna in Mulammadhyamaka, in the 27th chapter, which has 27 chapters, at the end of that text, Master Nagarjuna says, "Homage to Gautama, who, moved by his compassion, taught us the sacred Dharma in order to rid us of the misconceived views." And so, moved by compassion, he taught us the sacred Dharma, means that by knowing what the truth and reality of things is, we need to do away with our negative, ignorance. As the Buddha said, the sages do not wash away the sins of sentient beings, nor do they do away remove the suffering of sentient beings like with their hands, nor do they transpose their own realization, but by teaching the truth, the reality of the truth, they help beings to liberation. So we do not want suffering, we want happiness. And therefore, what the Buddha is saying is that we need to, each and every individual need to work for themselves. So this is what the Buddha is saying, that of course the Buddha cannot give his own realization to us as such. And therefore he said, you are your own master as well. So he actually says that everything is in your hands, so the responsibility lies on your shoulder. So the Buddha himself treaded the path progressively and became finally enlightened. He even went through the 6-year austerity practice. And sometimes we have the impression that, of course, the Buddha went through the 6-year austerity practice, and that is as if that he did everything for us, and that we can reach enlightenment without much effort. That's wrong. So we actually have to understand that the Buddha showed us an example as to how to go about with the practice through arduous practice, like the 6-year austerity practice. And so in order to rid us of misconceived views, he taught us the holy Dharma. So what is that holy Dharma? So as soon as he became enlightened, the Buddha said, I've found this profound teaching, which is peaceful, profound, peaceful, free from elaboration, clear light, and uncompounded. I have found this nectar-like Dharma. Even if I were to teach it to others, nobody will comprehend it. Therefore, I shall remain silent in the forest. So, he was talking about this profound nectar-like teaching is this selflessness. So, of course, with regard to the teaching of transcendency of things as well as suffering, nature of things, it is also there in the non-Buddhist traditions as well. But with regard to this the thing that he found, which is referred to as profound, peaceful, free from elaboration and so forth, it is something that was not known in that time. And therefore the Buddha retreated into and remained in this forest without giving teaching. But as time became more ripe for beings to receive his teachings, then he went through the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And then there are the Purposeful wisdom teachings. And then the Heart Sutra that we recite during these teachings is called the Perfection Wisdom in 25 verses. So these teachings, the Perfection Wisdom teachings, were taught in Rajagriha, in the Vulture Peak, on the Vulture Peak mountain, and during the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma. And then there is the third set of teachings called the third turning of the Wheel of Dharma, which were taught in places like Vaishali and so forth. And one of the most important teachings of this teaching is the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And then the sutra at around the time of passing away, and then also this Tathagata Garbha Sutra, the essence of the Tathagata. And so in the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the Buddha laid out the basic foundation of the teaching of the Buddha, which pertains to the causality, the law of causality, saying that suffering comes from the origin of suffering, and then the total elimination of that suffering, which is true cessation. And then he taught, after teaching cessation, he taught the true path through which the true cessation is attained. And so in the Four Noble Truth teaching, sutra, so the Buddha didn't mention the person who actually circles in the samsara, the cycle of existence, but he taught selflessness, which refers to the lack of self, which is self-sufficiently existing self. And then during the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma, this true cessation, which was taught in the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, was emphasized and elaborated on. And when teaching about the nature of this true cessation, of course, true cessation is that elimination of the negative emotions. And sometimes in the Madhyamaka philosophy, it is referred to as ultimate reality as well. That of the suchness. And with regard to Master Nagarjuna's verse, where it says the grasping at true existence is eliminated by that of emptiness, or it dissolves into emptiness. And so when you say, use the instrumental term, it refers to the path. And then when it says that it dissolves into, it shows the cessation. And so and then in the third turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught that of the subjective clear light mind, and linking that the sutra to the tantric teachings. And therefore we have in the second and third turnings of the Wheel of Dharma what are known as the object clear light, which is emptiness, and then that of the subjective mind clear light, which realizes that emptiness. And then, with regard to the commentarial tradition, we have Master Nagarjuna and his disciples and followers who explicated the explicit content of the teaching of the perfection of wisdom, and then regarding the implicit content, the progression along the path, the distorting the perfection of wisdom. There we have the tradition that has come down from or through Maitreya, and then Asanga and his disciples. And after Nalanda monastic institution, then there evolved the Vikramalishila monastic institution, where the teaching of the Buddha was studied extensively. And then in the 7th century, Tibet received Buddhism in the beginning, and then in the 8th century, Chisung Detsen, the Tibetan emperor, invited Chandrakirti. And Buddhism spread very widely in Tibet. And then there was a decline in the teaching again for some time. And then one of the descendants of the Tibetan emperors invited Master Atisha Dipankara Srijana. And there was not much emphasis on the study of through the triple process of refuting others' position, establishing one's own position, and then rebuttal of criticism to that. But just how to go about with the practice in which the 3 strands of Gadam tradition also evolved: the Gadam Scholastic tradition, Gadam Lamrim tradition, stages of the path, and then the Gadam pit instruction tradition evolved. So Atisha wrote The Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment. If you actually were to go through a good explanation of this text by Master Atisha, we need to actually relate it to and those of the other writings of Master Nagarjuna, such as Mula Madhyamaka Karika and so forth. Of course, Tsongkhapa wrote The Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. In the earlier sections, he followed the pattern of presentation done by Kadamba masters, and then in the insight, the penetrative insight section, he actually went through the triple process of refuting others' position and so forth. So there's this saying that of course we have a short life, and therefore we don't have a great amount of time to go through in extensive study, and therefore we could focus on a summarized kind of teaching. But nevertheless, we have the teachings comprised in the Tripitaka, and therefore we need to actually go through these teachings, and then gain some understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, and gain conviction through reason, and not just follow the teaching on blind faith, saying, oh, this is what the Buddha said, we must therefore believe. So if you actually go on the basis of blind faith, then it would be like constructing a house on top of an ice. So as time goes by, the ice will melt, and then the building will collapse. So this should not be the way we go about with the teaching of the Buddha. So following Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, then we have in Longchen Rabjam's writing, such as the Yishinzu, and then in the trilogy of Ease and Comfort, there is the concentration, resting in concentration, and then particularly that of the Simging also, which followed the pattern laid down in the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And then in the Sakya tradition also, the 3 visions, what are known as the teaching pertaining to 3 visions, that also follows the same pattern of the stages of the Path to Enlightenment Jena. And then the jewel ornament of liberation by Gampopa Dabotargin also follows that. And in Sharava's writings, I've heard that Sharava actually begins his teaching with the teaching on the Tathagata Garbha, the essence of the Buddha nature. And so Gampopa follows that pattern. So sometimes we say that the Chonangpa follows the Shendong, the extrinsic emptiness, and then we actually distance ourselves from them. That's not necessary. So I actually, following the instruction of Master Panchen Lama, the first Panchen Lama, who says that a master who is well-versed in the definitive teachings, as well as having the experience of the teachings, could find all the teachings, all the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism converging to the same point. And so all these teachings that we have in the Tibetan tradition are all good. And so after Master Adisha wrote the lamp for the path to enlightenment, all the Tibetan Buddhist traditions followed that genre of teaching of the stages of the path to enlightenment. And we have the texts written by them in these traditions. So generally speaking, the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, are actually fashioned after the specifically specialized teaching, leading disciples through into the tantric path. So the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, of course, is laid down for someone to practice it in one sitting, and going through the practices of turning the mind away from samsara. But we need also to be able to relate this teaching to the three pitaka, the three baskets of the teaching of the Buddha. So raise your hands, those of you who have not come here before. So there are quite a number of new disciples. And so I usually say that, tell this story that there was an abbot in Kham, and some visitor came to the monastery to see the abbot. So the abbot was not in the monastery, and one monk came and said the abbot is not here in the monastery. And the visitor asked where the abbot has gone. And then this attendant to the abbot, who was in the monastery at that time, maybe he was quite a frank person, he told the visitors that the abbot had actually gone to threaten the elderly people in the town. So if we follow the teaching of the Buddha only on that kind of faith, then this is what could be said. But with regard to the teaching of the true cessation, I mean, of course, it is something that can actually inspire us to follow the path through reason, whereby we understand that things, although do appear as if they have some kind of objective independent existence, yet they do not exist that way. And that could actually inspire us to follow the teaching of the Buddha. Otherwise, if you are told that if you don't believe in the three jewels of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and have kind of all kinds of wrong perceptions or conceptions, then you go to hell. That kind of teachings. In the traditional Abhidhamma Kosha Kariga, it is said that 20 lakes beneath the earth at the Bodh Gaya is that of the hell realm. But if you actually pierce through the ground, then maybe we reach America. So we cannot believe in such teachings literally, because they don't really stand to the test of reasoning and empirical experience. So, of course, with regard to the teachings on the workings of karma, actions and causality, as well as about psychology and emotions and so forth, these we can actually believe. So, of course, Master Nagarjuna also has said that if you were to hear the details about the hell realms, then it can actually cause you to have fear. But we are talking about using this mind, and using this mind that we can attain the omniscient state of Buddhahood. But when you are overcome with the destructive emotions, and then, as an expression of this, we indulge in negative actions of speech and body, then, of course, we could create negative karmas that could lead us to these unfortunate states of existence, such as the hell realm and so forth. We cannot say that good things that are said in the scriptures, of course, we can. It's possible to happen, and bad things cannot happen. So, studying about the true cessation, we can actually gain conviction in the teaching of the Buddha and feel inspired to follow the path. And so, we should not feel discouraged at all to follow by saying that, oh, if we do such and such things, we will go to hell and feel demoralized. That's not how we should react to the teaching. So, of course, we have all kinds of opportunities and facilities in the world that we are born in today. But if we are not able to use them positively, constructively, then they will not be conducive condition for our practice. And that we could also see that these facilities could actually also be like stimulus for our suffering. And then with regard to suffering, there is the deeper suffering, not just the painful experience, but the deeper suffering of the pervasive conditioning, existential suffering. This is what we need to overcome. And so by studying the different texts, we need to actually raise doubts and qualms, and then, these questions, and then we need to delve into the teaching through critical analysis, and then gain conviction in the teaching. So the organization founded by the late Master Tenzin Chamjin also, you should be able to engage in the study of the teaching. So you are one of the biggest Buddhist centers in Taiwan. So then the Champion was a very good person. So of course you have already started studying philosophy, and I would like to reiterate that you should not just follow the pattern of the Kadam Lamrim, but the Kadam Shungpawa, the scholastic tradition. So in order to rid us of the old misconceived views, the Buddha taught the holy Dharma. I was commenting on these lines. So the second turning of the wheel of Dharma was commented by Master Nagarjuna in terms of the explicit content of it. And then with regard to Tantra, Master Nagarjuna himself has written in connection with the Akshobhya Guhyasamaja Tantra, he wrote these two texts, Dorje and Dose. And then there is the 5 stages of the completion stage of Guhyasamaja by Nagarjuna. And then Aryadeva wrote the Judu, the Compendium of Practices, which is like a commentary to Master Nagarjuna's text, the 5 stages. And then Master Chandrakirti also wrote the Clear Lamp, which is commentary to the Guhyasamaja Tantra. And so these masters have some connection to us in terms of Tantric teaching. So first we're going to go through the text. So the verse number 2 of the first chapter, as compassion alone is accepted as a seed for the abundant harvest of Buddhahood, then water for its growth, and so forth. So here the homage is paid to compassion, not to some deity, a special, one's own special meditation deity. So this has significance in itself. As he says here, so there's great compassion with which you are unable to, this experience with which you are not unable to bear the suffering of other sentient beings. And so you have compassion, you are unable to bear the suffering of sentient beings who are suffering right now. And then those who are not suffering now, but they are creating the causes for suffering, you also have compassion for them, because they are also going to suffer because of their action. And so here, the compassion must also be understood in terms of some kind of inner strength. Not only wishing others to be free from suffering, but that I will work to free all sentient beings. Because ignorance is the root of suffering, and therefore this and that it is a distorted view. So as long as there is this kind of distorted view, and there is an antidote to it. So this comes through some circumstantial or some kind of a condition, because there is always an opportunity to see the reality as it is, and therefore you need to reflect on the true cessation. When you think about true cessation, that it is possible for you to attain it, you'll see that it's possible for you to reach a state whereby you have overcome the negative emotions, and therefore you will also be able to see that it is possible for others also to attain the same goal, and therefore you will have the courage to work to free others as well. And compassion is the root of our happiness. All religious traditions teach love and compassion. There is different interpretations, maybe, from the point of view of the theistic religions and the non-theistic religions, such as Buddhism. So we see that all sentient beings do not want suffering, but want happiness, and therefore we need to work for the well-being of others. That's the main reason. And oneself is just a single individual. Others are numerous, infinite. And therefore, if you remain selfish, there's no way you can accomplish your goal fully. In Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, on which I received teaching from Kuno Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen, the Master Tenzin Gyaltsen from Kenur in 1967. And after having received the teaching from him on this text, it really helped me to make transformation within myself. And Master Tenzin Gyaltsen from Kenor said to me that there has never been a greater text than this in terms of the practice of altruism, since it was written in the 8th century. So you should also study this text by Shantideva. Even if you are not a religious person, a believer as such, if you could study the 6th chapter and the 8th chapter, it doesn't matter whether you have no belief or in a religion or not. But anger is an agent which disturbs our peace of mind. And therefore, the 6th chapter teaches patience or tolerance. It would be helpful to you. And then the 8th chapter teaches the benefits of cherishing others over oneself and the shortcomings of selfish attitude. So even if you may not be a Buddhist, these 2 chapters will be really helpful. And a non-believer could also benefit from these 2 chapters. Shantideva says, all happiness and joy in the world comes from wishing others to be happy. All suffering comes from wishing oneself alone to be happy. And then he says, if you are not able to exchange one's own happiness with the suffering of others, leave alone reaching Buddhahood. Even in samsara, you will not have happiness. So if you look in the world, we do not need to use some kind of inferential logic, but this is something that actually is seen by us. There is so much suffering that are caused by human beings ourselves. And this is because of selfish attitude, due to lack of cherishing others over oneself, thinking of benefiting and caring about others. So if the world is disturbed, you also are disturbed. So if you look at personalities like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, who were dedicated for the well-being of others, they were happy themselves, more relaxed, and known in history as great personalities. So Mahatma Gandhi is somebody everyone loves. So leave the religion aside. But if you look at the world, even without talking about religion, and this is what happens when you think about when you are caring of others more than oneself. If you remain selfish, you will not fulfill your own goal. But if you are compassionate, altruistic, you'll have more friends while you are alive. And even after your death, your neighbors will say, oh, how sad this person has now gone. But if you also only remain selfish, bully others, deceive others, then nobody will trust you while you are alive, because you are trying to deceive others. And then you also have to remain in anxiety, because you will also think that others would try to deceive you. But if you remain honest, and if you meet with somebody who is trying to deceive you, you could be tough with that person. So the more selfish you remain, all kinds of misfortune will happen to you. Therefore, Shantideva says, if you do not exchange your happiness with the suffering of others, then leave alone attaining Buddhahood. Even in samsara, you will not be happy. And therefore, in summarizing the teaching, he said, all the Buddhas, having contemplated or pondered what is the most beneficial thing, have found the Bodhichitta to be the cause of happiness. And therefore, altruism is important. So for us who are seekers of omniscient state of Buddhahood, compassion is the first course, like the seed for the abundant harvest of Buddhahood, and then water for its growth, and finally what matures as a state of lasting enjoyment. Therefore, I praise compassion first. So Master Chandrakirti pays homage to compassion. And then the third verse. So the reason why we could generate or develop this wish and the aspiration for others to be free from suffering, all sentient beings across the expanse of space to be free from suffering. So we have the sense of an I, thinking of me. Of course, you exist, because you are the one who creates causes for pain and pleasure, and also experience the result of your actions for pain, pleasure. So there is someone who causes pain and pleasure, and there is an experiencer of the cause, that result, those results. So the mere I, of course, is not rejected. The Bodhisattvas, who are dedicated for the well-being of others, cherishing others over oneself, have this courage and the resolve to work to free all sentient beings from this suffering and its causes. So for them, of course, what they understand is that when they have the sense of I, they actually see the I to be illusion-like, not something that is solid and concrete, like we as ordinary beings grasp at itself. So whatever we think of, me, others, happiness, suffering, samsara, nirvana, and so forth, they all appear as if there is some kind of objective independent existence, truly existing, and then we grasp at that and self. And so it says first, fixating on or attached to the so-called I and as itself, and then this is mine, gives rise to grasping at things. So of course we can talk about this is mine and so forth. So the sense of I that we are talking about here is this holding on to an I which is independently existing. And then, accordingly, we also have this sense of mine, as if there is this possession that aggregates having some kind of concrete independent existence. And then we also think about our fame and so forth, similarly. And then we make division. Because of this sense of I, we also make the division between I and others. And then we also have attachment to those that are who are one's own near and dear ones, and aversion towards our adversaries. And helpless beings driven as a water meal. So this was used in India. And then the Buddha also commissioned the Wheel of Life painting, which has 5 parts to it, which is actually painted in front of the temples, in the Tibetan temples. So it shows those of the 12 links of dependent origination in the outer circle. So here the beings are helplessly going in circle like that of the water meal. So even in dreams, we have the sense of an independent I, although it may not be very manifest, as in the case of the waking state. So for those of the Shravaka Arahats, and particularly Buddha Arahats, they have overcome that of the grasping at true existence, but they could still have selfish attitude. So for us, ordinary beings who are yet to enter any path, we have this sense of, we fixate on an I that is independent, and also that of a selfish, self-centered attitude, as if they are competing with each other within ourselves. So to counter these two, we need to develop wisdom, realizing the things lacking any kind of independent existence, to counter that of the grasping at some true existence of an I, and then cherishing others over oneself to counter self-centered attitude. So this self-centered attitude also is helped by the grasping at some true independent existence of an I. And then with regard to compassion, there is compassion viewing or observing mere sentient beings, and then compassion observing sentient beings, in the nature of impermanence, and then that of compassion observing the lack of inherent existence in beings. So when you think about the impermanent nature of sentient beings and have compassion for them, that compassion is qualified by, is known as Cholamikpa, which means observing the phenomena in terms of impermanence and so forth. And then there is this compassion, which is qualified by that of the understanding or insight into the lack of true existence in sentient beings. And with regard to things that are transcendent, Vaibhashikas talk about the four phases, which is arising, abiding, then decaying, and disintegration. Whereas Sautrantika philosophy and above say that disintegration of things is the result of the coarse, which itself gives rise to the object itself. And so as soon as something comes into being, it is subject to change and disintegration. So if you look through microscopic particles, you'll see that particles are always fluctuating, don't remain static. So whether it's external objects of our cognition or the subatomic particles, if you look at them, you'll see that they always move. So here, seeing sentient beings are like moon's reflection in moving water, and seeing them as seeing them change and as empty in their nature. So this the change refers to that of the. This verse refers to these three types of compassion. Compassion, observing merely sentient beings, compassion which observes that of the change or the phenomena, the qualification, which is the impermanence, and then the compassion observing the reality of sentient beings. That is an empty nature. So we as human beings have this marvelous human brain. And then externally there is the teaching, which combines the teaching of the Buddha, which combines both the method and wisdom. And then we have the teachers who reveal this teaching to us, following the traditions of Master Nagarjuna and so forth, and down to our own direct teachers who give us teachings. So when you think about these, reflect on this, you find that you have the external facilities that you are free from. You have freedom to, which is freedom from the 8 unfortunate states, and then there are endowment or resources, which are 5 within oneself and 5 external. So you are free from the 8 unleisurely states, and then you also have these 10 resources. So at such a time, you should think that you leave some positive imprints, understanding that the negative emotions can be eliminated, and that you have the potential for the 3 Buddha bodies. And understanding these, then you will have the aspiration to reach Buddhahood, the omniscient state. So following the path, the 5-tiered path, referred by the mantra of Heart Sutra, you should have this inspiration to develop the path within oneself. So have this courage and determination to reach the state of omniscience, Buddhahood, for the benefit of all sentient beings across the expanse of space. And when you have this genuine aspiration to reach Buddhahood, omniscient state for the benefit of all sentient beings, you have developed the genuine Bodhichitta, which is the first Bodhisattva path. And then you progress from there to the path of application or preparation, and then you also need, go on to progress to the path of seeing, whereby you reach the path of seeing, realizing emptiness directly, and therefore, with the help of wisdom, realizing the true nature of things, you actually progress along the path. So with the help of one's teacher's teaching. And so, if we were to follow the teaching of the Buddha according to those, in the fashion of the beings of sharp faculty, we first need to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness. And on the basis of realizing emptiness, you will have this aspiration to reach enlightenment. So, in order to develop the penetrative or the special insight into that of emptiness, you need to develop single-pointed concentration, with the help of which you use your intelligence to actually see the emptiness in a meditative way, and thereby you reach the union of shamatha and vipassana, and reach the path of preparation. And within that, there are the 4 phases that you progress along, which are called heat, peak, and supreme dharma. The forbearance, and then the supreme dharma. And then after that, you enter into the path of seeing. So in each of these 4 phases within the path of preparation, your insight into emptiness deepens further and further, and the dualistic appearance kind of withers as you progress from through these 4, and then you reach the path of seeing, whereby you have all the dualistic appearance with regard to emptiness is gone. And therefore you reach the path of seeing, realizing emptiness directly, which is referred to in the Heart Sutra, in mantra, as Paragati, which means gone beyond. So the first two, Gati, refers to the path of accumulation and path of preparation. And then Parasangati comes when you reach the path of meditation. And then Bodhiswaha refers to that of enlightenment, Buddhahood. So you should have this determination to lead all sentient beings to that state of Buddhahood. Not just, stubbornly thinking stubbornly, but you should also see the reason. You should understand that this kind of aspiration comes through an excellent kind of understanding, through insight and penetrative insight into the reality of things. And so it says the victorious son, overcome by compassion, which is to completely liberate all beings, and fully dedicated, as in the aspiration of Samandabhadra, his joy is complete. This is known as the first. With this attainment from now on, he is known or referred to as a Bodhisattva. So here, the Bodhisattva is the ultimate Bodhisattva. And then the next verse, now born in the family of the Tathagatas, completely abandoning the three constant fetters. So the fetters refer to those of the afflicted kind of doubt. It doesn't, of course, it's not saying that we should not have any doubt about the teaching. Without doubt and we will not delve into the teaching as such. And so here, it is a kind of afflictive emotion or afflicted state of mind. And then when you hear about the teaching of liberation or those of grasping at true existence of a self and so forth, when you hear these teachings, you should have some kind of a doubt whether this is true or not, because then you will question and then you will actually critically analyze the teaching, otherwise not. So for those who follow the teaching on blind faith, of course, they will not have much doubt and speculation. But for those with sharp faculty, they will always have questions and doubt about the teaching. And the more they do critical analysis into the teaching, they will find the truth of the teaching, and then they will do away with the doubt, finding that these teachings on emptiness and so forth are reasonable, based on reason, and that you can actually gain conviction in such teachings. To completely abandon the three constant fetters, the Bodhisattva possesses supreme delight and is also able to stir 100 worlds. So I'll stop here for a break, 15-minute break. So if you need to go to the loo, please go.
Coffee tistunga. Coffee tistunga. His Holiness is going to. Someone requested His Holiness to give Bodhichitta vow, and His Holiness says that he will do. He has planned to do later on during the teaching, along with Jianang by the fifth Dalai Lama's, on the basis of fifth Dalai Lama's teaching. Next question. How to, as lay people, engage in these teachings of Nagarjuna and Madhyamika like that? His Holiness says these are not taught. Nagarjuna and these Nagarjuna and his successors didn't compose their theses, treatises for monks and nuns only, for all followers. And however, of course, in the monastery, within the monasteries, they are emphasized and studied in some of. This system was there even in India a long time ago. There's a text by Indian master Dajjamba Arhat. His Holiness said something. In his text, it is mentioned that some monks who just wear the monk's robe also don't observe. So this is Dajjamba Arhat Sakalha, an Indian monk. Some monks don't observe their vows well. So there were such monks even in such as early as those days in India. So lay people shouldn't think we are just like lay. We have no hope of understanding these treatises. This is totally wrong. So that's why in India, His Holiness said he used to tell these treatises should be studied by both lay and ordained without distinction. Because I say now we should be 21st century Buddhist. So that means we should follow Buddhism on the basis of understanding, not just faith. So therefore, in order to understand, you should study the text. Regarding how to study, the way it is studied in the big monasteries like Sera, Depong and Ganden in South India, which they do in a very intensive way, like first beginning with the primary logic, which is called Duja, then the logic on mind science, and then the syllabus was ordered in a very progressive and systematic way. Since last year, I told this in Mongolia that there's a very systematic system of arranging the syllabus since the time of since our time in Tibet. So you should reinstitute that system, especially for the monks, and also you can for lay people. For example, the study on things like mind science and basic primary logic, these should be studied even by non-Buddhists, because they are not really confined to Buddhism. The knowledge that is revealed in these texts are not really exclusive Buddhist teachings. They are for everybody. Now, next question is regarding the Lamrim teachings. They first start with the Guru devotion, but in order to develop faith in the Buddha, without knowing any knowledge on what the Buddha is, his qualities, it's difficult to develop Guru devotion. So there seems to be a contradiction. His Holiness says, frankly speaking, there are many different Lamrim lineages. Many of them are based on lineages, like oral lineages. They are like not based on like extensive logical explanation. Rather, they are based given orally in a very essence-wise. However, Tsongkhapa's Lamrim is different. First comes Guru devotion, but before learning about Guru devotion, what are the qualities of the master with whom you should practice Guru devotion, and what are the qualities of the disciples, like that. So as I said earlier, before one embarks on taming other beings, one should first be tame oneself. This is explained in the Sutra Alankara text by Asanga, which enumerates the 10 qualities of teachers. So masters should have 10 basic qualities before they are able to, before they could be considered as a real qualified master. So not just having a big title or a big sitting on a big throne doesn't mean that the Lama is qualified teacher. Now, with regards to Vajrayana system, now when you receive teachings, once you received initiation, especially from a master, you should regard the master as Vajradhara, Buddha himself. This is a different case, especially when you have received the 4 initiations. And in the 4th, the Lama must explain the point. Be able to explain the meaning of the ultimate union, which is a state of Buddhahood. So now, with regard to a qualified master who have given you the 4 initiations with full authority, then you can say such a master must be a Buddha. But as time passes, in the first chapter of Abhisamaya Alankara, it is not said that if someone is your Lama, it doesn't parade that the Lama is a Buddha. So it doesn't mean one should keep in mind that one's own master who has given you initiation is in reality parades as a Vajradhara, fully enlightened being. And Tsongkhapa has also stated in Lamrim Chemo that if the Lama teaches something unwholesome, then one should reject it with reasoning. And in the 50 verses also, the Tsongkhapa has quoted that and said that the wrong teachings, the wrong advices of the Lama should be explained back to the Lama through reasoning. And there's a story in Drepung in the past. There are many young tukus, reincarnated lamas in that Kamsen in Drepung and many of these young tukus sit in the front rows of the hall during prayers. But the discipline master knows that many of them are misbehaving. So he said that one day the discipline master said, if you want us to see whatever you do as good, positive, then you shouldn't engage in doing strange, like crazy things, unwholesome things. At the same time, if you expect us to follow whatever you say, just don't say anything you want. So I was told this story by His Holiness said someone monk in Tibet when. So now, with regard to teaching, the Lama cannot expect his disciples to show great respect to a few words, thinking, saying this is your Lama's secret or very precious teaching. It doesn't make sense. Whatever it may be, it must be a special teaching that contains the essence of the 3 baskets, 3 trainings. And the next question is regarding the stages of the path common with the lesser beings. So, as long as you are not familiar, you have not trained well with that stage, it is pointless to go on to the next stage, stages of the path shared with intermediate beings. But His Holiness says, like with regard, in his point of view, quantum physics is an extremely deep and profound concept. One of my Indian physicist friend, Raja Ramana, he once told me that in the West it's a in the West it's a relatively modern idea, but in the East it was an ancient, at least about 2,000 years old theoretical concept. And so among my scientist friends, many of them, especially with regard to presentations on the view and also on the cognitive perception, the Eastern tradition is very deep. So in order to understand the concept of liberation, you need the understanding of emptiness. So even before studying on the three objects of refuge, it is important to have an understanding of emptiness. Even for there are even people among scientists who are not Buddhist at all, but they are studying on emptiness. So His Holiness's point is that he didn't really agree with that question. Next question: how to put into practice the teachings His Holiness gave once they returned to their home country, Taiwan. This, His Holiness says, this depends on you, how you wanted to do it. And mainly, it was like I said earlier, and read this Chinjuk Bodhisattva Charya text by Shantideva and practice these ideals. Like Tsongkhapa said, you must put as much effort as one can to implement what you have learned on daily basis. In order to do that, first one should have a motivation that I will try my best, and then you should try in every day. So if you have such a determination, then with each passing year, 1 year pass, second year pass, then slowly you will, you might be able to have make some progress. When I was a small child, I feel Bodhichitta is very difficult, and I even mentioned this to my teacher, Dr. Rinpoche, and he said, and Dr. Rinpoche said, don't worry, he himself is a practitioner of Bodhichitta, and he said he has experience of Bodhichitta. But after arriving in India, and I have, for a very long time, even now, put striving in Bodhichitta practice. So even though I haven't yet developed effortless Bodhichitta, I do have experience of Bodhichitta practice on the basis of effort. And the same thing goes with my understanding on emptiness. I have some experience in that, even though I may not have the effortless emptiness perception, realization. So let me tell you a little bit, when I was a little boy, I was recognized as Dalai Lama, and however, even though I may have been chosen, appointed as Dalai Lama since a very young child, what I know right now, or whatever experience I have right now, came through lots and lots of effort, study, diligence, and perseverance, and none of them came through just without effort and easily. So then, what about you? I mean, you. If it is the case, this is the case for the Dalai Lama, then for you, you must also especially put more effort. Next question is regarding how to improve and promote compassion and harmony and love and compassion among non-Buddhist fellow human beings of other religious traditions. Recently, I was in Sicily, Italy, and the Italians, the members there, the people there, they're very welcoming to refugees, and very welcoming, and showing a lot of compassion. And His Holiness said, he told them that you are doing a great deed, and it's really, really inspiring. But how about also now trying to go a little further and trying to extend your help to those, to these, in those very country where these refugees are coming, and and in India also, I say the same thing for Muslims. So I'm trying my best, whatever little I can, and you too should also do the same. And what is this? This is a moon cake, which is moon cake. And so I was, you were asking me questions, and I tried to answer. I didn't get chance to eat this moon cake. This is a cake that is prepared during autumn in Chinese tradition, and it's a celebration of it's a Chinese celebration. So in this world, we talk a lot about human rights. So it's my human right to enjoy this cake. So you're all looking at my face. What do you think? Am I savoring this cake, relishing its every bits and taste, or am do I look like I am not really enjoying it? Look at my teeth. I am 83, but I have quite good teeth. All my teeth are still intact.
Then I take this one. Wait.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, one of my, a person whom I knew, a Westerner, a woman, who was a student of Karmapa Rinpoche, the previous one, and Karmapa Rinpoche himself told, this woman told me that she, in her dream, she sees many deities. So maybe she said, I have reached the first ground of Bodhisattva. And I couldn't say much, but I said there are other qualities that are also attained when you reach that first ground of Bodhisattvas. So she must have felt quite arrogant because of that kind of dream, and said, maybe I have reached the first ground of Bodhisattvas. There are other qualities as we came across in the text. It's only says, like being able to move the world, 100 kind of world, and so forth. Joyfully progressing from Burmi to Burmi, and from the one ground to the next. So, of course, before we reach the path of accumulation, we need to put a lot of effort, and then we'll come to attain the path of accumulation, and then we progress through the path of preparation or application and reach the path of seeing, the first ground of bodhisattvas. So we come across in teaching in the text like Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life, and as you progress along the path, you feel, physically light and so forth, so that you have lots of energy to progress along that path as well. The various paths to the lower realms have ended, and the levels of ordinary existence are exhausted. This is taught to be like the 8th sublime level. So having reached the first ground of bodhisattvas, the path of seeing, you are no more under the sway of the ignorance, the grasping at some true existence. You have actually said bye-bye to that kind of a control of the ignorance over you. And then you progress along the rest of the bodhisattva grounds, striving for enlightenment. Even when remaining on the first level, he defeats those born from the speech of sage king, including solitary realizers. And through ever-increasing merit, on the far ground, his understanding also becomes greater. So having reached the first bodhisattva ground, that bodhisattva has the special insight that counters the extreme of samsara. He outshines those born from the speech of sage, meaning the solitary realizers and the Shravakas, and has reached that of the path of perfection. So through the power of his merit, he outshines those of the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddha Arahats. So he outshines them. And when, through the progression of the path, through the progression along the path, when does that Bodhisattva outshines those of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddha Arahats? Through that of the wisdom. So through that intellect, when does he? When will he be able to outshine those of the Arahats? So when he reaches the far ground, which is the seventh ground of Bodhisattvas, his understanding also becomes greater. So in the auto commentary by Chandrakirti on this, it is said that in the 10th ground sutras, it mentions so the prince, right, by virtue of his birth in the royal family, will outshine all the ministers. Oh, children of conqueror, it is like this. For example, a prince born in a royal lineage bearing the royal name outshines all the assembly of ministers by the magnificence of royalty through mere birth, not by analysis through the strength of his own intellects. When he has matured, then he will greatly surpass all the activities of the ministers through generating the strength of his intelligence. O children of conquerors. So how does the Bodhisattva become to be able to outshine those of the Arahats? O children of Congress, similarly, as soon as Bodhisattva generates a mind, he too outshines all hearers and solitary realizers through greatness of special thought, not by analysis through the strength of his own intelligence. The Bodhisattva, who abides on this seventh ground, Bodhisattva ground, will greatly surpass all activities of the hearers and solitary realizers through abiding in the greatness of knowing his own sphere. And then the commentary gives a paraphrase to the verse. One should know, therefore, indeed, only from the ground gone afar, the seventh ground onwards, does the Bodhisattva also outshine the hearers and realizers through the generation of strength of his own intelligence, not on the lower grounds. So the Bodhisattva will not be able to outshine the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas by his intelligence. And when does that happen? It says from this citation, one can clearly ascertain that hearers and solitary realizers also have the knowledge that all phenomena do not inherently exist. If they were not like that, because they would be separated from the thorough knowledge of all things, that things do not inherently exist. So there are those philosophical schools within Buddhism who say that the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddha trainees do not need the realization of emptiness in order to reach their goal of nirvana. But here it is said that they need. And so the Chittamatra talk about non-duality of object and subjective mind. And so there are those of the aspects or the types of realizations of the solitary realizers and the hearers. Hearers and solitary realizers also have the knowledge that all phenomena do not inherently exist. If it were not like that, So, of course, if they did have no realization, if those on the path of hearer's vehicle and solitary realizer vehicle, if they do not have the realization of emptiness, then we cannot talk about the bodhisattvas on the first ground not being able to outshine them through the intellect realizing emptiness, but that they could do so only when they reach the ground, the seventh ground. That cannot be said if it were not the case, because they would not be separated from the thorough knowledge that things do not exist inherently. Like those separated from the mundane attachment, they too would outshine even the bodhisattvas who had generated the initial mind, even though analysis by their own intelligence. Even through, like the outsiders, non-Buddhists, they too would not abandon all subtle increases or negative emotions which are activated in the three realms. So if the bodhisattvas on the first ground have no realization of emptiness, then the hearers do not have that kind of intelligence, then the bodhisattva on the first ground, we cannot talk about them to not being able to outshine them, the hearers and the solitary realizers as such. So because of the subtlety in the understanding of emptiness or selflessness, there is also subtlety in the understanding of the negative emotions. So however much one may have the experience through meditation of selflessness in the sense of lack of self-sufficiently, substantially existent I, and then there's this question that through this kind of realization of will it actually counter the grasping at some true existence in things, and therefore the answer from the Prasangika Madhyamaka point of view is that we need the grasping at true existence is itself a destructive emotion. And Aryadeva in the 400 verses says that just as the physical faculty, bodily faculty pervades all other sense faculties, likewise the fundamental ignorance permeates all other negative, destructive emotions. So the eye consciousness, the eye faculty, sense faculty, ear sense faculty, and so forth are permeated by the physical faculty, sense faculty. Likewise, the confusion or ignorance permeates all negative emotions, disturbing emotions, and therefore, in order to counter that, the teaching of the emptiness must be proclaimed first. And he goes on to say that if you understand dependent origination, then the ignorance will not arise. And so here we're talking about the reality in terms of dependent origination, suchness of dependent origination, which is the subtle emptiness. And in the commentary by Chandrakirti, it says that all negative emotions either arise from negative ignorance, or they are concomitant with ignorance. And so the coarser experience of negative emotions seem to arise from this ignorance, independence on ignorance, whereas those negative emotions, disturbing emotions which go together with the ignorance, inseparably are the subtle negative emotions, subtle attachment and anger. So the other philosophical schools will not consider such these as being the negative emotion as such. Although they may say that there is some kind of grasping at objects. So these subtle negative emotions, from the point of view of the Pasankaka Madhyamaka point of view, go together with the ignorance. So there are those which negative emotions, disturbing emotions, which are concomitant with ignorance. Whereas there are those coarser levels of experience of negative emotions which arise due to this independence on the ignorance. So what is said in the quantum physics, and also if we also try to check from our own experience, we'll see there are these coarser, disturbing emotions, as well as the subtle ones which go together with the confusion. So until you are able to destroy all objectification in things, this kind of subtle negative emotions cannot be overcome from one's own mind stream, cannot be eliminated. Just by realizing selflessness in the sense of lack of self-sufficiently, substantially existent I, that kind of realization of selflessness will not do away with this subtle negative emotions. So because of erring as a result of referring to a self-entity of form and so forth, they would not even realize selflessness of persons because of their referring to a self-entity of aggregates, the course of imputing the self. So the kind of rough or coarser level of grasping at a self is acquired or kind of negative emotions. So it will come later in the text, which actually makes this differentiation between the coarser level of grasping at a self and the subtle one. And then, which is to say that there is no self which is separate from this aggregate. And then there is the Chittamatra view of selflessness, relating to which Master Bhaviveka criticizes Chittamatras, calls Sangha and his followers as shameless to go against the philosophical assertions of Master Nagarjuna, who was someone who was prophesied by the Buddha himself to comment on his definitive teachings. So the Chittamatras say that, of course, there is this appearance of things in a certain way. And therefore they say that things do not exist the way they appear to us, and then they go on to say that things do not have. They appear to have some external existence, but that's not the case. But just merely realizing that things have no external reality will not counter our grasping at the subjective mind as having some kind of a true existence. And also those negative emotions, attachment and anger and so forth, which arise on the basis of clinging to true existence. And so this can be countered, this grasping at true, those of the negative emotions, such as attachment and so forth, which arise as a result of clinging to true existence, can be countered by realizing the non-true existence in things. So there are those negative emotions, grasping at some self, which are acquired through some philosophical assertion, and there are those which are innate as well. So it says they would not even realize the selflessness of persons because of referring to a self-entity of aggregates, the course of imputing the self. So here, the verse that we covered says that until the Bodhisattva reaches the seventh ground, they will not be able to outshine those of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Arhats. So here, what we are talking about is selflessness of persons, which is actually shared by all, teaching which is shared by all four philosophical schools. So as long as there is a grasping at true existence of aggregates, there still remains some objectification in the self, and therefore you will not be able to do away with this grasping at a person. And then it quotes a line of It quotes certain lines from the Ratnavali, Precious Garland, written by Master Nagarjuna, which says that as long as there is grasping at the aggregates, psychophysical aggregates, there will still be grasping at a self, and so forth. And then in the Ratnavali, it was also said the entity of form is mere name, and the entity of the space is mere name, and so forth. And then it also says a person or being is neither the six elements, such as earth, fire, and so forth. And then it says, if not all these, what is a being? And then it says, a being is a composite of the six elements. And these six elements, composites, constituents themselves are composites of their own parts. So for many years, I have this understanding of the coarser level of selflessness. And then, through my further effort and endeavor to gain insight into the subtle selflessness, then one is able to actually see things like illusion. So the entity of form is a mere name, and the space is mere name. And so the quantum physicists also talk about it. Nothing can be found objectively when you actually try to search for the identity of things. Because if things were to have any objective existence, you should be able to find them the more you delve into the nature of things. As in the Ratnavali, so if you actually analyze matter into its parts in the different directions, the quantum physicists and the physicists actually say that they find quarks as they go deeper into the subparticles and so forth. And so nothing whatever is found when you try to search for the identity of the objects themselves. And so a space here is meant the mere absence of obstruction. So this vacuity, which is mere absence of, so entity of form is, or matter is without mere name, and space is also mere name. And if the basic building blocks of the elements, earth and so forth, are mere name, and we cannot actually pinpoint as being this being the earth element and so forth. When you actually break each element into their own constituent parts. So since such a basic building block of the elements cannot be found, therefore they are mere name. And therefore, since the objects, the things such as space, form and so forth are mere name, merely in name, therefore the name itself does not have real existence. And so this is a powerful statement. So I do deity yoga practice, where we come across this mantra, Om Swabhava Shuddha Sarvadharma Swabhava Shuddhahang, and I do meditate on emptiness. And then in the 22nd chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, it says, he's not one with the aggregates, nor separate from the aggregates. He's not in the aggregates, nor are the aggregates in him. The Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. What is Tathagata? And so I actually switch the word Tathagata to myself and say, I am not in the aggregates, I'm not one with the aggregates, not separate from it and so forth. Who am I? And within that kind of meditation on emptiness, when I use this verse from Ratnavali, which says, form is mere name and so forth, because form is mere name and so forth, it's really powerful to destroy all objectification in things. And so the Gungdan Temple says, there is a verse which says that when you actually search for the identity of things, of course, the basis of designation of the object itself cannot be found as well. So the object which is designated, when you search for it, it cannot be found. And so he says, although you actually reject the existence of the designated object, he says the basis of designation is not rejected. So I wonder why he said this. Maybe he has a reason. Because if you were to actually posit some entity called basis of designation, which is not destroyed when you destroy the objectification of the object designated, I mean, what kind of object it could be? So I wonder if Master Tsongkhapa says, when Master Tsongkhapa says that the conventional things we would have to say that the conventional things can stand to the test of reason and analysis. So he says that there could be only two ways things can exist. One is by way of designation. So if you say that the designated object is rejected through analysis, but the basis of designation is not refuted, I cannot understand why Gungdan Tempe Dome has said this. If you say that when you actually try to search for the designated object, even the basis of designation of that object cannot be found. So otherwise you are left with the basis of designation of the object. So when you look into the final reality of things, he says this, that the designated object is unfindable, but the basis of designation is left. not reject it or refute it. So Tsongkhapa says that either things could exist by way of designation or by way of their own objective existence. So, of course, we are not rejecting the existence of things as such. I had a tasty tea earlier. I cannot deny the tasty tea. But if you were to actually search for the tea within itself, or the drinker, myself, you will not find anything that you can pinpoint as being the tea or the person or the action of drinking and so forth. And Milarepa says that when you delve into the ultimate nature of things, even the Buddha cannot be found. But everything does exist in conventional terms. So when you do not do any kind of ultimate analysis into the things, you can say this thing exists, that thing exists. So we come across the division into two truths. So what I'm saying here is, which will come later, what I'm saying here is that just as things appear to our minds, they do not exist the way they appear. So when you are able to decisively come to this conclusion, nothing can be found to be objectively existing. All objectification is destroyed. And therefore, Chandrakirti says later on in this text that things, when they are analyzed through the sevenfold reasoning, nothing can be found. But then, through worldly convention, they do exist. And so, the Master Tsongkhapa says that there's no other way than things existing by way of designation. And that is inevitable. Therefore, one should drive or steer one's mind towards that. And then in the commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara, Tsongkhapa mentions there's the causality, dependence in terms of causality, and also the designation, by way of designation. And so the subtle dependent origination is the existence by way of dependence on one's own conception. There's no other way of existence apart from being designated by conception. And since they do not have any essence in and of themselves, therefore, they exist by way of dependence on other factors. So there are two ways things can exist, either objectively independent, they exist from their own side, or by way of this kind of designation. And when you come to the subtle understanding of the designation, this is said to be the most difficult part in Madhyamaka philosophy or view. And in Lamrim Chemo, the great stages of the path to enlightenment, Master Tsongkhapa mentions that things conventionally exist, have three criteria: that they are renowned in worldly terms, conventions, and that they are not undermined by other worldly conventions, and that they are not undermined by those of the ultimate analysis into the things. I have not seen this kind of clear-cut kind of definition in other texts and other writings of other scholars. As long as there is grasping at aggregates, to that extent there is grasping at self. And from that arises the karma. And then rebirth. So as long as grasping at aggregates, psychophysical aggregates, is there you cannot destroy objectification in things. And then the seventh Dalai Lama says, in dream you see horses and so elephants and so forth. But when you wake up from the dream, none of them exist. And therefore, when you do analysis into the nature, the final nature of things, of course, things like me, others, and so forth do exist. But although things have no independent objective existence, when you do this kind of deeper analysis into the nature of things, they still do have existence, but they appear as if they have some objective existence. And that is what we call the appearance of the object to be negated in establishing emptiness. Whereas the lower schools of philosophy within Buddhism says that things appear to have objective existence, and that's how things are. And so that is the object of negation that is refuted by the Madhyamaka philosophy. Philosophers. And then there is the difference between whether this object of negation appears to our sense perception or not. So the ordinary beings are overcome with this appearance of things having objective independent existence to their six perceptions, and look at that from your own experience, he says. So if you actually posit an object of negation apart from what the Prasankika Madhyamaka says, then you fall into the assertion of the Savatantrika Madhyamakas. And Changyurabhe Dorje says that when you analyze the things, you cannot have anything that is left solidly there. Nothing whatever can be found when you put them to the test of reasoning and critical analysis. And then next we come across the six perfections. Here, verse number 9, here the first cause of perfect enlightenment, generosity is the most important. Giving his flesh with enthusiasm infers what is not seen. Verse number 12. Verse number 13. 14. 15. So, end of verse number 15, which mentions that of the perfection of generosity. Of course, giving is something that is taught in all religious traditions, like Christianity. There is so much emphasis on giving alms and charity. And then there's also giving Dharma, which includes that of giving education, of establishing schools and giving education to people. And then there's giving fearlessness, which is to save life, which are in danger, and also stopping people from non-violence, so that eventually we could have a world free from demilitarized and free from all weapons. And then there is also the giving love. So whether you believe in a religion or not, you do practice giving. And then there is giving without any, which has no referential object as such. So, which is mentioned in verse number 16, giving, which is empty of giver, gift, and receiver, is known as transcendent paramita. So without a giver, there's no action of giving, and without a action of giving, there is no receiver and giver and receiver and so forth. So there is, without an actor, there is no action. If we don't do any kind of analysis like that, whether the action exists in and of itself or the actor exists in and of itself and so forth, of course, when we don't do that kind of analysis, these are there. But when we do analysis into their nature, then nothing would ever have their existence. Attachment to these three is taught as being ordinary paramita. The Bodhisattvas, firmly established in such mind, has become a holy being, ravishing and radiant with joy, which, as the water crystal jewel, perfectly vanquishes dense darkness. And so that's the end of first chapter. So I'll stop here for today. So we'll have a review session at 2:30 today in Kalachakra Hall, Kalachakra Temple. 2:30 review session. Oh, Aling. Gorgeous.